the Detroit Pistons, and they are headed to the NBA Finals to face the San Antonio Spurs.
Torks, two-strike pitch. Swung on and missed! Struck him out! And once again, the Cleveland Indians are the king of the hill in the American League Central Division.
And a franchise record, 7 home wins, and for the first time since they re-entered the NFL in 1999, 10-win season.
Was 2007 the greatest year in Cleveland sports history? Now I know what you're thinking, wasn't 2016 the greatest year because the Cavs won the championship? Well, for this video I'm talking about all-around success. So each of the 3 major sports teams in Cleveland had to have had a successful season for that year to be considered a greatest year in Cleveland sports history. Now in 2016, yes, the Cavs won the championship, the Indians got to the World Series, but the Browns were 1-15, so the drop-off there is too extreme for 2016 to be considered a greatest year. And that's why in this video I'm going to make the case that 2007 was indeed the greatest year in Cleveland sports history. So right now, just to give a basic gestalt about 2007, obviously I'm going to go into more detail later on in the video, but in 2007 the Browns went 10-6 and looked very promising. The Indians went 96-66 and should have won the World Series. And the Cavs advanced to their first NBA Finals in franchise history. Now, like I said, later on I'm going to go into more depth about each of those 3 teams and why I believe they make 2007 the best year ever. But after that, I'm also going to talk about other possible years, because I've done a little bit of research going into this, and there were a few years that kind of grabbed my attention, so we can have some fun speculating with all of that. But without further ado, let's get into it. Let's talk about the greatest year in Cleveland sports history, the year 2007. So the first 2007 Cleveland team I'm going to talk about is the Cleveland Browns. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, you know I've talked about the 2007 Browns enough for a lifetime. I mean, I made an hour-long video about that team for God's sake, so there's not a whole lot I can say that I haven't already said a million times. But for the sake of new viewers, I will elaborate about this 07 team a little bit. So in 2007, the Browns went 10-6 and had one of the best offenses in the NFL. And they did all this seemingly out of nowhere, because in 2006 they were 4-12. So the Browns were not on anybody's radar in 2007, but sure enough, everything fell into place and they had a hell of a year in 07. Of course, they had a ton of weapons to work with. They had Kellen Winslow, who I think had the best pair of hands I've seen a Browns receiver have, at least in my lifetime, and I was born in 1995. I mean, I guess OBJ has better hands, but Winslow's a close second. The Browns also had Braylon Edwards, who had 16 touchdowns in 2007, second only to Randy Moss, who had that crazy year in New England that season. The Browns also had Joe Jurevicius, who led the league in third down receptions. The running back was Jamal Lewis, who finished with over 1,300 rushing yards. They had a great offensive line. Their quarterback was Derek Anderson, who made the Pro Bowl that season. And of course, they had their first-round draft pick, Brady Quinn, who was supposed to be the future. He was waiting in the wings. Everybody thought he was going to be the next savior. And yeah, the 2007 Browns gave the city a lot of hope. They were very exciting, very entertaining to watch. Unfortunately, they just missed the playoffs because the last week came down to a tiebreaker between the Colts and the Titans, and the wrong team won, so the Browns missed out on the playoffs in disappointing fashion, but it was still a great season and gave everybody hope. Now, most people will say the 2007 Browns were a very fluky team that caught lightning in a bottle, but I totally disagree with that, because yes, in 2008 they were very disappointing. They finished 4-12, but there were reasons for that. Like, they were hit hard with injuries, they had a very tough schedule, they kind of bought into their own hype a little bit. So 2008 could have been a learning experience for them, because they obviously were very humbled that season, finishing 4-12 after going 10-6. So I truly believe had that team come back in 2009, they could have gone anywhere from 9-7 to 11-5, maybe even 12-4 if things really fell into place. But unfortunately, we'll never know, because after the 2008 season, the owner at the time, Randy Lerner, decided to blow it all up. He fired the head coach, Romeo Crennel, and the general manager, Phil Savage. And that was really the end of that 2007 Browns team. Very disappointing end to what could have been. But like I said, the 2007 Browns gave the city a lot of hope, and that's why I say they contributed to 2007 being the best year in Cleveland sports history. So the next 2007 Cleveland team I'm going to talk about is the Cleveland Indians. Now bear with me here, because I'm not the most knowledgeable about the game of baseball. I did follow it a lot when I was younger, but I don't know, the whole no salary cap thing really turns me off, so I don't watch much of it anymore. But I did watch a lot in 2007, so I am able to speak intelligently about that season. So, 2007 marked the Indians' return to the postseason for the first time since 2001. Because if you remember, that great run the Indians had in the 90s lasted until 2001. Then after that, they tore the team down and built it back up again, but it took until 2007 to make the playoffs again. And in 2007, the Indians posted a 96-66 record. They won the AL Central, and they had a lot of lovable characters on that team. They had fan favorite Victor Martinez. They had Grady Sizemore. They had Kenny Lofton, who returned halfway through the season. Kenny Lofton, of course, was that, adored character in the 90s teams. And they also had Travis Hafner, who was just coming off that MVP caliber season in 2006. Now, he did have a down year in 2007, but at that point, we didn't know that he was never going to go back to his old form again. We assumed at some point in his career he would go back to his old dominant form, but it never happened. As far as the pitching staff was concerned, the Indians had two aces. They had CC Sabathia, who won the Cy Young that year. He won 19 games, I believe. And they also had Fausto Carmona, or whatever the hell his name was. He also won 19 games. They also had a closer by the name of Joe Borowski, who had 47 saves, which is a hell of a season on his part. So when the postseason came around, the Indians defeated the Yankees in the ALDS 3-1. And then in the ALCS, the Indians had the Red Sox on the ropes. They were up 3-1, but they couldn't do it. They just, in classic Indians postseason fashion, they choked the series away and lost in 7 games. And it was just so heartbreaking because if they won that, they would have played the Colorado Rockies in the World Series. And everybody in their right mind knows the Indians would have destroyed the Rockies. So really a heartbreaking way to end the season. Such a great season, too. And, similar to the 2007 Browns, the 2007 Indians were never good again. Like in 2008, they were 500, and then in 2009, they blew up the team again. And that right there is what I believe gave birth to the whole Dolans are cheap narrative, because a lot of people at the time, including myself, didn't understand why, after waiting so long to get back to the playoffs, why would you blow up the team just a year and a half later? Of course, it has to do with the finances of baseball, and, Cleveland's a small market, so they just can't afford to keep all the players. Just like an example, I heard this on Bruce Drennan's show. Apparently, they offered CC Sabathia $18 million, but he laughed at the offer, and, that's just an example. Like, the Cleveland can't compete with, New York and Philadelphia and all that stuff, so that's it. Like I said, that's why I don't watch baseball. I consider it a giant waste of time. Like, right now, the star is Francisco Lindor, but it's like, what's the point? He's going to leave. It's just, I don't know, I can't get into it. But anyway, that 2007 Indians team was a blast to watch. That was literally the last time I really followed the Indians closely. And, you wish it could have ended differently, but we're just talking about the year 2007 for this video, so that's really all that matters. So the last 2007 Cleveland team we have to talk about is the Cleveland Cavaliers. And as most of you know, in 2007 the Cavs advanced to their first NBA Finals in franchise history. And to get there, they had to knock off the Detroit Pistons, who were still considered the class of the East at the time, so it was pretty remarkable, and not many people saw it coming. Now the naysayers will say, well, that Pistons team was on the downswing, and they didn't have Ben Wallace, so while that's true, the fact that it didn't even have to go to 7 games is pretty impressive on the Cavs' part, so I think that kind of cancels it out. But the Cavs did advance to the NBA Finals, where they were unfortunately swept by the Spurs in 4 games. Very disappointing, but nobody really was surprised one bit. I take that back. People say that in retrospect, but at the time, didn't you think the Cavs would win 1 or 2 games? I remember I thought the series would go 6 games, but especially because the Cavs actually swept the season series with the Spurs that year. But whatever, it's ancient history now. So, an interesting note about that year, at the time, after the Cavs knocked out the Pistons, it looked like the Cavs were going to rule the East for a while because, you looked around and after the Pistons, there was nobody else. Jason Kidd and the Nets were no threat. The Wizards with Gilbert Arenas were obviously no threat. The Cavs always beat them. So it really looked like the Cavs were going to rule the East for quite some time. But then came the offseason, and that's when the Celtics formed their big 3 with KG, Paul Pierce, and Ray Allen, and that really foiled the Cavs' attempt to rule the East. It's funny because even in LeBron's second stint in Cleveland, it looked like the Cavs were going to dominate the East, dominate the entire NBA after winning the title. But then Kevin Durant joined the Warriors, and that kind of ruined that. So just bad luck for LeBron and the Cavs both times. But yeah, going back to the 2007 Cavs, they were the only 2007 Cleveland team that was able to sustain their success. Because, as you know, the Browns and Indians quickly fell apart after 2007. But the Cavs went on to have 3 more successful seasons until, LeBron bolted to Miami. So props to the Cavs for being able to sustain their success and not just falling apart like the Browns and Indians. Anyway, that concludes this little summary about the 2007 Cleveland sports teams. As I just laid out for you, they all had amazing success, which, proves my point that 2007 was indeed the most successful year in Cleveland sports history, as far as all 3 teams are concerned. And I'm going to prove my point again. So, at almost any other point in Cleveland sports history, if you ask somebody which Cleveland team is the closest to winning a title, you'd only get one answer. Like in the 2000s, it was the Cavs. In the 90s, it was the Indians. In the 80s, it was the Browns. But if you ask somebody that in 2007, it'd really be a toss-up, because the 2007 Browns were 10-6 and they looked to be getting even better. The 2007 Indians were on the cusp of winning the World Series. And the Cavs in 2007 went to the NBA Finals. So, which team would you really say? I guess at the time the Indians, because, they should have won the World Series. They were the only team that should have won of those 3 teams. But still, it was, you probably get different answers from different people. So that really shows me that 2007 was the best year. And if you want to go even further, a lot of people in Cleveland adopt Ohio State as their home team. So it's like Browns, Cavs, Indians, and Buckeyes. So Ohio State that year in 2007, they played Florida in the football national championship game and in the basketball national championship game. Even though they lost both of those, it's still another Ohio team that got to a championship game. So 2007 was just really a radically successful year for Ohio sports teams, even though none of them did win the big one. But as far as other possible years are concerned, like I talked about in the beginning of this video, 2014 is one that jumps out at me. And let me explain. So the Indians finished 85-77 in 2014. They did not make the playoffs, but that's still a good record in the MLB. It gives you hope for the future. As far as the Cavs were concerned, LeBron James came back to the Cavs. That's one of the best moments in Cavs history, and it gave us a lot of hope for the future. As far as the Browns were concerned, that was the year they started off 7-4 with Brian Hoyer. Brian Hoyer was the hometown kid, and that was the year they also drafted Johnny Manziel, which I know is a joke looking back, but at the time there was a lot of excitement. I'll never forget that one draft party once they announced his name, how crazy that room went. I didn't understand it myself. I knew his game wouldn't translate to the NFL, but nobody else seemed to see it. But yeah, that's 2014, a pretty successful year. Not on the level of 2007 if you ask me, but still a good year. Another possible year is 1989, because for the Browns, that was Bud Carson's first year as head coach, and that was the year the Browns beat the Steelers 51-0. And I believe the Browns got to the AFC title game that year, and they lost to the Broncos. That was like the least memorable AFC title game against the Broncos, if my memory serves me correctly. As far as the Cavs were concerned, I did not do any research about the Cavs, but I have the game NBA 2K18, and the 89-90 Cavs are in that game as a classic team, and that was like the Mark Price, Brad Daugherty team, so I assume they were good that year. And the Indians, I looked them up. They only won 73 games, so they're the ones keeping 1989 from being like a great year in Cleveland sports history. So, looks like 2007 reigns supreme. But yeah, I can't think of any other years besides the ones I've just listed. I could be wrong. Maybe I glossed over one. Please comment a year that I forgot. But yeah, I think 2007 is number one as far as my standards are concerned, and that is, every team has to be successful. But anyway, that's probably going to wrap up this video. I can't really think of anything else to say about this topic. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. I'll put the username up here on the screen. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And yeah, until next time, I'm Ramen Robbie, and thanks for watching.
Take this, haters.